Here is the charge against our ancestors. I quote from a student who passionately laid it out to their professor a few years ago. America was and continues to be located on stolen lands. This land was forged in genocidal conditions to eliminate Native Americans from the continent. We lived on their stolen land without their permission. We have yet to admit that genocidal policies neutralized any possibility for an ethical space. The United States of America, the student declared, was irrevocably tainted as a country. No American could claim to ever have a legitimate ethical identity short of giving back stolen lands to the Native Indians, or paying them for all illegally acquired lands. This student was voicing the latest version of a campaign that has been going on my whole life. It is now called settler colonialism, and it frames our history in Marxist oppressor-oppressed terms. The idea of settler colonialism was popularized by Australian academic Patrick Wolfe, whose book Settler Colonialism was published in 1999. According to the doctrine of settler colonialism, Europeans who came to the New World, and to other areas such as Australia and New Zealand, engaged in a particularly egregious form of colonialism. For them, it has been alleged, the goal of colonization was not simply to dominate a subject people politically, culturally, and economically. In addition, it was infused with a racially motivated drive to replace or exterminate the indigenous inhabitants altogether. In short, millions were murdered, probably tens of millions. Now, I'm not going to enter a plea of not guilty to this indictment. Instead, I'm going to go full denialist and plea it didn't even happen. There are two main points I want you to remember in response to this charge of genocide. First, adapting the phrase from David Starkey that got him canceled, there could not have been a genocide because there are so many damn Indians still around. Second, so that they can pump up the genocide numbers, they claim there were more Indians here in 1491 than is remotely plausible. Tricky. Though I'm going to be knocking down a lot of lies here, let me be clear what I'm not doing. I will not whitewash our history and pretend that Europeans always acted as angels. They did not, and episodes like the Trail of Tears are just plain bad and unjust. But neither should we accept this narrative of our ancestors as demons who, from the moment they stepped foot in the New World, were saying, the only good Indian is a dead Indian, and merrily slaughtering their way across the continent. That story is just a lie. I will be drawing throughout here from the book Not Stolen, The Truth About European Colonialism in the New World by Jeff Finn Paul. Thanks very much to Wanjiru Njoya at the Mises Institute for recommending this book. To give you a flavor of the cunning trick I mentioned above, listen to this. David Stannard, in his book American Holocaust, claimed that what happened on Hispaniola was the equivalent of 50 Hiroshimas. Stannard is referring to one of the islands that Christopher Columbus found on his first voyage, and on which he established a colony immediately. Hispaniola today hosts the nations of Haiti and the Dominican Republic. To produce a genocide narrative, the 1491 population of Hispaniola is claimed to be as high as 7 million. A U.S. government-funded website, Native Voices, states, A.D. 1493. Christopher Columbus, who needs to demonstrate the wealth of the New World after finding no gold, loads his ship with enslaved Taino people. During the next 4 decades, slavery contributes to the deaths of 7 million Taino. By 1535, the Taino culture on Hispaniola is gone. Now, the Tainos had no written record, so what can we say about this huge population claim? As an engineer, I really love how Finn Paul comes at this using a technique I learned as back-of-the-envelope calculations. Despite using it throughout my career, it feels like a magic trick. So we don't have 1491 population numbers for Hispaniola, but what do we have? Well, we know how big Hispaniola is. It's just over 1/2 the size of England, excluding Wales and Scotland. And we do know something about the population of England about that time, which is well studied. Our best guess is that England in 1500 had only 2.1 million people, living on double the area of Hispaniola. So, our first sanity check. If Hispaniola Hispaniola really had 7 million people in 1491, that would make its population roughly triple that of England at the time, and its population density about 6 times higher. We have reasons to doubt these numbers. England by 1500 had one of the most advanced agricultural regimes on earth, with widespread use of heavy plows and draft animals. Meanwhile, the natives of Hispaniola were using stone tools and practiced a light form of hoe and mound farming in clearings. They grew very limited crops, ate little, and conserved energy to make up for their poor diet, and employed no animal power or mills. Furthermore, England was almost entirely cleared of forests, and a significant portion of its land was either farmed or used for grazing. While on Hispaniola, owing to their lack of metal axes, their island was heavily forested. Coupled with the mountainous terrain, this means that only a small percentage was arable. So a much more reasonable estimate is that the population of Hispaniola was more like 200,000. Disease, flight, and mistreatment in that order did reduce the population to around 90,000 in the 1510s. So this would deflate Standard's claim of 50 Hiroshimas down to less than a single atom bomb, and that is if we lay moral blame on the Europeans for things like disease, which they did not intend and in fact often fought when they had means to do so. Similar exaggerated population sizes are made up for the New World overall, one popular claim being that the New World had more people than Europe in 1491. I won't step through the back-of-the-envelope calculations again, but suffice it to say that according to demographers, the New World contained only about 10% of the global population of 450 million people in 1491, while the other 90% lived in Africa, Europe, and especially Asia. Given that the New World is about half the area of the Old World, why the big difference in population estimate? In the pre-modern world, people could only live where there were abundant food supplies. The major Old World civilizations evolved under ice-free conditions in semi-tropical and temperate regions such as the Nile Valley, Mesopotamia, and in the Indus and Yellow River valleys. Unfortunately for the New World peoples, the area that was ice-free year-round was relatively small. Fully one-third of the New World is locked up in Canada, Alaska, and Greenland, which were far too cold to support large populations. Most of the continental United States freezes pretty hard in the winters, and the world was in the grip of a little ice age when Columbus arrived. Most of northern Mexico is desert. Central America and equatorial South America are mostly thick, impenetrable jungle. At the southern tip of the New World, Argentina and Chile also get cold in the winters. This leaves only a narrow territory at the edge of the rainforests in central Mexico, and analogous territory in parts of the Andes Mountains where conditions were right for the multiplication of pre-modern peoples. So, where were the major populations of Indians in 1491? Close to 80% of the New World population was located in two very localized regions, central Mexico and the northern Andes. The rest of the New World was thinly populated indeed, with all of North America north of the Rio Grande probably containing between 1 and 3 million people. Most of these were spread across the Mississippi, Appalachian, and Great Lakes regions, with few settled in the west and north, apart from a few Pacific coastal regions, including California. Population densities in most of this area were usually less than 1 person per 10 square kilometers. For comparison, England had about 10 people per square kilometer in 1500, which is a population density fully 100 times higher than most of North America at the time. Particular to where I live, I'll just briefly mention the Mississippian culture, one of the most advanced pre-Columbian civilizations in the continental U.S., evolved along the shores of this river system. When the Spanish under De Soto arrived in the area in 1541, this proto-civilization was at a low ebb. The maximum population supported by some of its cities was a few hundred people. Once we understand where the Indians were, then look around at where Indians are today, then we can see the relevance of the Starkey point. There are still so many damn Indians around, exactly where they were when Europeans arrived. In fact, compared to those times, we see a growth of Indian population in places distant from the warm zone that large numbers had not been able to survive in before Europeans arrived. By the way, the current total fertility rate of American Indians is just slightly under that of non-Hispanic whites. And that would not count the many descendants of Indians who do not identify as Indians because of interbreeding. Here indeed is the blood guilt we may have as Europeans in North America. Credible experts have calculated that the total number of North American Indians who were massacred during the entire 500-year history of European colonization is less than 10,000 individuals, maximally 20,000. This is out of a population initially numbered at more than 1 million. Very likely, more Europeans were massacred by Indians during the settlement period than the other way around. Certainly far more than 10,000 Indians were massacred by other Indians in North America during this same time period, though next to no attention is paid to this fact by modern historians. To wrap up the genocide denial argument, I'll state the so many damn Indians point more formally. The Americas today are simply teeming with the descendants of the indigenous people who were alive in 1491. Europeans remain a minority in every country that had a dense settlement of indigenous people in 1491. In fact, the U.S. Indian population has remained steady, proportional to the overall U.S. population since 1810, despite massive immigration from Europe in the later 19th and early 20th centuries. We Europeans did not genocide